That night, under the harsh glow of the studio lights, the man everyone knew as the gentle soul of the set suddenly looked straight into the camera and delivered a line that froze the entire crew in place. "If you knew how these so-called legends treated people of color," he said quietly, "you'd stop calling them legends." No one expected words like that from him. He had always been the calm one, the kind one, the man untouched by scandal or bitterness. But kindness doesn't blind a person. If anything, it had made him see more clearly than anyone else what audiences were never meant to know. He had watched glamorous, widely adored stars dismiss an extraordinarily talented black choreographer simply because they didn't like the color of his skin. He had heard once worshipped leading men send memos instructing their teams, "Never allow a person of color to be positioned as my equal." And he had stood frozen as another beloved icon treated Mexicans, indigenous people, and black crew members as if they were beneath notice right in front of everyone. The golden age looked like a dream from the outside. But he knew the truth. The dream had shadows. It was built on fear, silence, and whispered slurs traded behind closed doors. People whispered about who the worst offenders were. Which of the era's brightest stars became their cruelest selves once the spotlights dimmed. But what stunned everyone most was the secret he finally chose to reveal the moment that pushed him, the gentlest soul on set, to speak out at last. There was one actress in particular, a woman the public adored for her elegance and grace, a woman whose image floated across magazine covers like that of an untouchable angel. To the world, she was pure charm and kindness. To insiders, however, she was someone entirely different. During one major production, when the studio suggested hiring a rising black choreographer whose talent had begun to draw attention, she objected immediately. The reason recorded by the crew was chilling in its simplicity. "I'm not comfortable working with him. It's just a few words enough to quietly stop a man's career." There were stories of fundraising events where she quietly asked organizers to remove the images of black children from campaign materials because she felt they weren't visually fitting to those who had dedicated their lives to helping all children. The request landed like a blade, but what angered the gentleman on set most was a small remark she let slip backstage during a party. Someone mentioned an acclaimed black actor who was paving the way for generations to come. She dismissed the idea of him ever being a romantic lead with an icy, careless phrase. The words were light as air when she spoke them, but they hit like stones on the hearts of those who had fought to open Hollywood's doors. Actors of color were struggling to break into a world designed to keep them out, and comments like her soft, casual, and cruel were the walls they ran into again and again. The contrast between the woman's angelic public image and the quiet prejudices whispered about behind the cell scenes was something he could never shake. He once confided to a colleague, "I don't hate her. I hate how we worship the icon and never dare to look at the shadow it casts." She never shouted discrimination the way a few others did. She didn't send blunt memos banning certain people from approaching her. She never used slurs where microphones could catch them. But it was the polite, perfectly manicured forms of exclusion that made the prejudice cut sharper. Soft words can hide hard edges. For him, sugar-coated discrimination was still discrimination harder to confront, because no one wanted to believe such a shining figure could ever be capable of it. Yet her name wasn't the one that shocked him the most. There was another, a man the world celebrated as a fearless activist, a voice for justice, a symbol of rebellion. But the pages of his private diary revealed something entirely different. So different that the gentleman on set once muttered, "Stunned, he fights for justice only when there's a camera pointed at him." This next figure had been immortalized as a revolutionary. The performer who challenged the system, the man who took a political stand in front of millions. People applauded him as if he were a hero walking among mortals. But behind the curtains, the image faded. The man on set had read some of the diary entries himself, notes never meant to be seen. He found dismissive lines that reduced the struggles of entire communities to marketing strategies, as though a movement born from oppression and blood was nothing more than a public relations stunt. He later heard the same sentiments spoken at a closed-door party. where the icon shrugged off the name of a historic activist with the cold indifference of someone commenting on a billboard. "Just another face the media polished," he said. As if that erased the pain of a generation. What cut even deeper were the hidden financial documents. While the world hailed him as a champion of the marginalized, he was funneling money into a group that quietly fought to keep people segregated. A group that cloaked its fear of others under the noble-sounding banner of preserving culture. No one outside his inner circle had a clue. The public saw a hero. The records revealed a contradiction, so sharp it felt like betrayal. The moment that finally shattered the illusion came backstage at an award ceremony. According to internal notes, the actor refused to present a trophy to a celebrated performer simply because he didn't want to stand beside him. The gentleman remembered hearing the dismissive remark, "It's fine if he wins. But sharing the stage with me? Not yet." The words hung in the air, freezing the entire tech crew in place. To fans, he was the bold voice calling out injustice. But to the man who had watched him up close, he was just another performer, someone who could play the role of a good man as fluently as any character he'd ever portrayed. If that man was a half-hearted hero, the next name on his list wasn't pretending to be one at all. This one didn't soften his views, didn't put on a progressive mask, didn't hide behind flowery speeches. He genuinely believed himself superior to entire groups of people, and he made no effort to conceal it. This actor was the symbol of the rugged frontier, the mythical warrior of the silver screen, the embodiment of old-fashioned patriotism. But beneath the legend was a worldview carved out of arrogance and fear. He didn't whisper prejudices in back rooms. He spoke them loudly, plainly, without apology. No metaphors, no delicate phrasing, he believed, openly and proudly, that some people were simply meant to stand above others. The man's declaration of superiority wasn't subtle. He said openly that some people belonged above everyone else. And according to the gentle observer who had watched him closely for years, that belief seeped into everything he touched. When the struggle for equality reached boiling point across the nation, many actors chose to stay quiet. He did not. He dismissed the movement as the work of agitators, aligned himself proudly with politicians who resisted progress, made no effort to hide which side of history he intended to stand on. But it wasn't just talk. There were moments whispered about long after the dust settled, moments when he crossed lines that should never be crossed. Witnesses spoke of how he once lashed out physically at a journalist who challenged his views. An attack born not from anger, but from conviction. It rattled the man on set more than anything else, not the violence itself, but the certainty behind it. What chilled him even deeper was the way the icon used his influence to reshape stories into something that suited his worldview. While producing a sweeping historical epic, he instructed the writing team to erase contributions from entire groups of people who had fought and died in the real events. He dismissed the idea of acknowledging them as propaganda, forcing the writers to rewrite history into a version where only one kind of hero existed. A single note from him could alter the direction of an entire film. The influence didn't stop at the screen. His production company quietly adopted a hiring practice that pushed away talented applicants before they even had a chance to try. Resumes from certain backgrounds were discarded instantly. It didn't matter how skilled or experienced they were, what mattered was whether they fit his image of who belonged and who didn't. To the world, he was the face of rugged heroism. To the man who had seen him up close, he was proof that Hollywood doesn't just produce stories, it manufactures belief systems. And he used his authority to spread something far darker than entertainment. But if he represented open, thunderous prejudice, the next person on the list expressed cruelty with a different flavor altogether. She was someone the public adored, a fragile beauty whose smile seemed soft enough to break. Her bright lips and trembling voice painted a picture of innocence, the kind that made audiences want to protect her. Yet behind that delicate frame was a machinery of cold dismissal that startled the man on set more than any shouted insult ever could. There was a second version of her, one hidden far from cameras and adoring fans. "Some people show their cruelty with a fist," he once said quietly. "She did it with a raised eyebrow and a look that could slice a person apart," he remembered. Hearing about an incident during the filming of a lively musical, When she demanded that a dancer and exceptionally skilled performer be fired immediately, his only offense had been brushing, ever so lightly, against her costume in a crowded rehearsal. No intention, no insult, just the accidental touch of fabric against fabric. Yet she reacted as though he had committed something unforgivable, and the studio followed her orders without hesitation. But what ignited the deepest anger in him happened years later, moments before she stepped onto a brightly lit stage. The director informed her that several audience members seated in the front row were individuals. She did not expect to see their holders of premium tickets, excited for the show. Her reaction was explosive. She demanded they be moved, insisting she refused to perform with them so close. The room fell silent. No one could believe the words coming from the woman whose voice had once soothed millions, yet the staff complied, shuffling the audience members elsewhere to avoid her wrath. And then came the moment that still made him wince whenever he recalled it. At a private gathering, one of the era's most beloved entertainers approached to greet her colleague, a respected performer, someone who had broken barriers with grace. She responded with a slur so sharp and deliberate that the entire table froze. It wasn't the slip of a drunken mind or the careless mistake of someone overwhelmed. According to the man who witnessed her behavior up close, it was spoken with. The calm certainty of someone who believed she stood too far above others to ever face consequences. The bitter irony was that the woman the world saw as a symbol of tenderness and sorrow was, behind the curtains, capable of a coldness that stunned him more than any outburst ever could. He once murmured, almost to himself, "Nothing is crueler than someone who plays the victim beautifully, but turns others into targets." She never had to draft hateful policies or shout ugly slogans. She had something far more powerful: fame. And Hollywood bent where fame leaned. If she taught him that sweetness could hide thorns sharp enough to draw blood, the next figure on his list revealed a different danger, one he found even more deceptive. This was the type of person who wrapped themselves in progressive ideals like a brightly colored cloak, while an entire structure of contempt sat quietly beneath the polite smile. The man in question had those piercing, unforgettable eyes, the kind that made entire audiences melt. He had the gentle charm of someone who appeared incapable of malice. He raised money for charity, funded community programs, and launched a brand that donated its profits to those in need. To the public, he was a beacon of kindness, perhaps one of the brightest Hollywood ever produced. The man on set never expected to place him on his list. But he had once sighed deeply and said, "There's no prejudice more painful than the kind disguised as kindness." The racing world adored this man. He owned a team, invested heavily in the sport, and earned a reputation as the actor who brought integrity and sportsmanship into the arena. But beneath that noble exterior, the reality was far more jagged. Team files revealed that entire categories of applicants had been quietly barred from joining for years. Not because of skill, not because of experience, simply because they didn't match the team's desired image. It was a rule never stated publicly, but enforced relentlessly. What stung the observer the most were the private journals pages, filled with assessments of fellow performers that dripped with disdain. A celebrated athlete turned actor, a man whose talent lit up screens across the country, was described with words so cold and dismissive that they didn't merely reveal bias, they revealed conviction. It was a version of the beloved star that the public would never know, a side that emerged only after the camera shut off and the applause faded. Worse still, he didn't keep these views locked away in notebooks. He acted on them. He once penned strongly worded letters opposing a program designed to bring children from different backgrounds into the same classrooms. His argument was polished and polite, but it was built on the same crumbling foundations used by the very politicians he publicly criticized. The contradiction was a crack the man on set could never unsee. He had once believed this actor, genuinely wanted to make things better. But after watching him categorize people by skin tone with the same ease others sorted photographs, he realized something heartbreaking. Some people shout about freedom not because they believe in equality, but because they don't want to be mistaken for the conservatives they secretly resemble. The public continued to adore him. His charm, his philanthropy, his handsome image, all of it shone brightly. But to the quiet observer who watched from the shadows, that polished exterior only made the darkness inside more dangerous. People trusted him too much to imagine he could ever hold a harmful belief, and that blind trust made his prejudice far more potent. Yet even that wasn't the deepest hypocrisy he encountered. The next figure on his list was another master of the polished mirage, someone whose progressive reputation glistened like a fresh coat of paint over a wall already rotting beneath the surface. This man had a voice that could hypnotize a room, a presence that drew admiration like gravity. He stood beside performers from every background, shook their hands, posed for photographs, and accepted praise for being an advocate long before Hollywood realized it needed one. To the outside world, he was a champion of equality, but to those who walked backstage with him, truth was more complicated, more uncomfortable. The quiet observer had attended many of his exclusive gatherings, and once said something that silenced an entire conversation. He loved standing next to people from different backgrounds, so long as the cameras were watching. Behind closed doors, the cracks in the facade became impossible to ignore. Clubs where he performed regularly had policies written in elegant but unmistakably exclusionary. Language performers from certain groups were welcome to entertain the crowds, but never on the busiest nights, never in the starring slot he occupied, and never in the spaces reserved for the elite. It was a kind of soft, luxurious discrimination. No shouting, no cruelty on paper, just a line in a contract that separated one world from another. But the most disturbing stories were the ones whispered by photographers, tales of sudden fury, directed toward those who captured him from the wrong angle. One photographer recounted being struck while slurs spilled from the icon's lips, startling everyone who witnessed it. It wasn't professionalism, it wasn't stress, it was entitlement, plain and unapologetic. And then came the network he helped uphold clubs across multiple cities that maintained unwritten rules about who could sit where, who could headline, who could be seen alongside whom. These rules existed beneath polished chandeliers and velvet curtains, concealed behind the illusion of glamour. He didn't invent the system, but he supported it, strengthened it, and defended it under the guise of preserving an aesthetic. To the public, he was a stylistic pioneer, a voice for justice.
Ow.
But to the man who'd spent years watching from behind the scenes, he was a reminder that some voices sing about freedom not because they believe in equality, but because the performance makes them look righteous. And after him came another figure, someone whose on-screen coolness seemed unshakable, but whose real-life attitudes were anything but. He had always been the picture of effortless rebellion, the man who could silence a room with nothing but a cigarette resting between his fingers and a single raised eyebrow. The embodiment of nonchalance. People called him the king of cool, and the world agreed. But the quiet observer who had watched him backstage once made a remark that shattered that illusion. He was cool unless your skin wasn't pale enough to fit into his world. During the filming of one of his most iconic escape artist epics, the studio had briefly considered broadening the cast to reflect the diverse reality of soldiers who'd lived through the real war, but the star refused. He pressured the director, challenged the writers, and even threatened to quit. He claimed he was defending authenticity, yet the truth was far simpler. He didn't want to stand beside anyone who didn't match his idea of who belonged on screen. That was only the beginning. The part hidden beneath the surface unsettled the quiet observer more than anything that happened on set. Years later, files once kept under lock and key revealed that the admired rebel secretly cooperated with federal agents. He reported on actors, musicians, and activist people pushing for civil rights, handing over their names, schedules, and private details under the justification of protecting Hollywood from subversive ideas. But the observer saw the truth plainly. The rebel feared change. And he wasn't just afraid, he fought it. When landmark legislation aimed at ending segregation shook the nation, he didn't hide behind vague statements. He claimed equality was government overreach, that granting rights to marginalized people would upset the natural order. It was then the quiet observer murmured bitterly, if being cool means standing still while others suffer, then he truly earned his crown. The irony was painful. The world saw him as the champion of freedom, the rule breaker, the man who lived fast and thought fast. But not every rebel fights for justice. Some fight only to keep themselves perched on top of a carefully guarded hierarchy. And if he taught the observer that prejudice can be wrapped in swagger, the next figure revealed an entirely different variation of the same illness a hero on screen, a builder of barriers in real life. The towering actor who played ancient warriors and God-sent deliverers had long been considered the face of righteousness. His voice commanded armies on screen, his presence parted seas, and his characters fought for entire civilizations. But behind the cameras, he embodied a double life. On one side stood the noble rescuer of oppressed peoples. On the other stood the man who undermined real people's chances to stand as equals. Inside the studio system, he was infamous for quietly lobbying to reduce or eliminate roles given to performers of color. Screenwriters recalled how any character who appeared too significant or too equal would mysteriously vanish or shrink in importance after a meeting with him. One note, later shared by a director, chilled the observer to the bone. Audiences don't want to see anyone from that background standing beside me.
Nice.
It was enough to bury entire careers, and his worldview didn't stay confined to scripts. During a period of massive political upheaval as marches filled the streets and history wrote itself in real time, he poured money into campaigns known for opposing progress. Later, he used the influence of a national organization he led to deliver speeches that stoked fears of chaos messages, crafted with such theatrical force that audiences cheered without, realizing they were applauding prejudice. Disguised as patriotism to the outside world, he was heroism incarnate. But to the man who had watched his decisions cut opportunities from performers who deserved far better, he was proof that playing a savior on screen doesn't teach someone what justice looks like in real life. Some men wield power like a sword and never learn to lower it, but the next figure on the list demonstrated a different breed of discrimination. Softer, polished, quiet as footsteps on a ballroom floor. This star danced with such grace that audiences felt gravity give way beneath his shoes. Every suit he wore looked like elegance made human. He was perfection. Or so it seemed to the observer. He was a reminder that prejudice doesn't always shout, sometimes it smiles. In a celebrated musical from early Hollywood's golden era, he was given a number meant to honor a legendary dancer whose innovations shaped the art form. But behind the scenes, he quietly pushed aside the very communities whose traditions he claimed to celebrate. While the public saw an elegant tribute, those who worked backstage saw something colder, a performer determined to keep others out of the spotlight. Even as he borrowed from their genius, his chosen method of honoring a black artist was to paint his face dark, exaggerate his features, perform a stylized imitation on stage A number, crafted for white audiences and framed as a tribute. In this performance, every light shone on him, while the man he claimed to admire remained outside the system's frame entirely. It wasn't a single misstep either. He repeatedly requested all white casts, quietly rejected scenes he felt were too integrated, and consistently avoided sharing the screen with dancers of color in any context that might portray them as equals. No angry speeches, no official memos, just gentle suggestions and polite nods that every backstage hand understood with painful clarity. The observer said he saw the dancer's silent prejudice reflected in every major choice. Films about jazz that featured almost no black musicians. Dance numbers built on techniques borrowed from black choreographers, and never a single black dancer beside him to share the spotlight. The culture was adopted. The people were excluded. History would later call him the embodiment of elegance. But to the man who had witnessed these quiet decisions, that elegance hid something far less refined. He wanted the glow of the spotlight. Yes, but only 4 faces that looked like his own. And if he used grace to mask his invisible lines, the final name on the list revealed something colder still. A performer whose warmth on stage was merely a shell covering a very different heart off stage. The singer was beloved everywhere. Known for ballads that wrapped listeners in soft winter light, his voice was the sound of peaceful holidays, cozy fireplaces, and the illusion of kindness made musical. Generations grew up believing he embodied gentleness. But the observer knew a man who didn't sing, didn't charm, didn't soothe. A man whose silence felt colder than winter itself. The story began with the singer's eldest son, who wrote in his memoir that his father used slurs casually toward black people, toward Latinos, toward Jews, uttered not in rage, but with the same ease as commenting on the weather. To the observer, that quiet ease was more frightening than open hatred. It revealed a prejudice so deeply woven into him that it required no justification at all. Backstage accounts also described how the singer held membership in elite private clubs that explicitly barred people of color. These places had unwritten rules. White members through the front door. Everyone else have permitted it all through the back. The singer never objected. He embraced the rules, benefited from them, and let them shape the world around him. What embittered the observer wasn't simply that the singer held these views. It was how perfectly he hid them. How convincingly he projected warmth to millions while upholding the cold machinery of exclusion behind the scenes. His songs played at family gatherings, holiday dinners, and quiet nights at home. Meanwhile, the man himself helped sustain structures that made many families feel unwelcome, unseen, or shut out. The observer once murmured, "A voice can warm a nation. That doesn't mean the heart behind it warms anything at all." When he first revealed these stories, Hollywood froze not with shock, but with fear. Because deep down, it knew he wasn't exposing anomalies. He was exposing the foundation. The glittering golden age had been built not just on brilliant lights, but on invisible lines, quiet, sharp, and everywhere. Lines that chose who belonged, who succeeded, who vanished from the graceful ingenues to the socially conscious rebels. From the symbols of patriotism to the crooners bathed in spotlight, Glowich carried a shadow. The audience was never supposed to see. Every gentle smile, every polished suit, every speech about dignity only made the hidden truth sting more sharply. Behind the legends lay prejudices that shaped a Hollywood blindingly pale in its casting, in its opportunities, and the stories it chose to tell. Of all the figures in this tale, which one shook you the most? Feel free to share your thoughts, and if you want the next chapter uncovering even deeper shadows behind the industry's golden facade, just let me know. I can continue the series.